Hello, we're here today continuing the Associa Gulf Coast Educational Series. Today's guest speaker is Jenn Davida from Future Home Realty. And part of the reason we bring in a realtor to this educational series is, let's face it, unit owners buy and sell their condominiums and their single-family homes and their HOAs. So there's always layers of questions and challenges, if you will, regarding how to sell a home, what things you need to be concerned about when you're dealing with association-type living. And that's why I brought Jenn Davida in here to give us a little bit of insight, not only in the market, but what to look for when you're possibly buying or selling into an association. So Jenn, welcome to the call. Really appreciate your time. If I could you give us a little bit of your background, how you got into real estate and all that kind of good stuff?
Paul, thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. So I started at the end of 2005. I had been working as an operations assistant in the construction world, and it was something that was around me because of that. The owners were heavily into real estate and what have you, so I learned a lot. And it was something I was already interested in, and that just put a further fire underneath my skin to do it. And so the end of 2005 is when I got my license. I did hang it with Future Home Realty, and I have been with them ever since. And yeah, like they say, the rest is history. I've been full-time in that. The first couple of years, I actually was a mortgage broker, doing that simultaneously with the real estate. That was a great way to learn both sides of the industry. The mortgages are so important. As a matter of fact, even before you get to the property, the mortgages are probably one of the most important pieces to a real estate transaction, unless they're doing a cash purchase. But yeah, sure. 2005 and going strong.
So I know that real estate in and of itself can be, depending on what TV show you watch, can be extremely glamorous. And we all know that it's a lot of hard work. But from a buyer and a seller perspective, in my opinion, it's also very confusing. It can be intimidating because, quite frankly, I'll use myself as the example. I don't know how it works, even though I've bought a condo myself. I don't know the processes, so it can certainly be very confusing. What is it, and from a mortgage perspective and certainly from a home sale perspective, I want to talk a little bit about the market in terms of, obviously we're both here in St. Petersburg, Florida. What are you seeing here in the market in the middle of 2020, even with COVID-19 around us every day?
So it is extremely busy, even still, through the pandemic and people thinking that the market was going to crash regarding real estate and how that might slow down. We have not witnessed that. What we have witnessed, and I would definitely err on the side of caution, whether a buyer or a seller, is time frames, and really just elongating your time frames for expectations and being thoroughly prepared. So I know you have a lot of condominiums for your homeowners association management company, and I feel like the biggest thing you can do as a homeowner, whether let's say you're selling your property, is get all your documentation ahead of time for your buyer, just to make it easier, because every single facet is delayed or inundated right now. So that's the managers of the HOA, the board members, the title companies, the mortgage companies. So knowing that we are delayed on all our timelines, I'm not saying there's not some closings that are happening pristinely, but for the most part, just say, okay, you know what, we're coming out of this. There's delays. I know there's delays. Let me give myself an extra time frame, and let me go ahead and get my stuff for the sale ahead of time. Or if you're the buyer and the buyer's agent and your seller hasn't gotten those documents, get them fast. Make the phone calls. While you're making the offers, these types of phone calls should be made so you have it, because again, it's delayed. You may not get it right away. You may have to find out how can you get it. It's delay is the word, and then the only way to deal with that is to set the expectation to expect it and actually welcome it. And then even with the delay, prepare, and pretend you didn't have that delay.
That's fair. So time is critical in that example, but having the understanding that the market right now is extremely busy. knowing to get the documents early. There's your planning perspective, but also, be ready for delays anyway, and almost expect them. That way you're not frustrated with such a big purchase. Is that fair?
It's really fair. And you know what, to be honest with you, we go up and down in cycles with real estate, but when we get really busy, I think what we're seeing is we did not expect it to get like this after what we were hearing. But we've gone through cycles of real estate where it gets extremely busy, and we forget that we're supposed to pause and elongate timeframes because we're so in the midst of it. But I think this is the biggest lesson. Slow down, elongate the timeframes, and as an agent, just setting the bar, like you said, just setting the expectation. Normally it would be this. Now we're expecting this.
Now you bring up a good question or a good point about documents. From an HOA and a condominium perspective, obviously documents are critical in terms of governing documents, articles of incorporation, the budgets. These are things that buyers will require. And so you're right, the unit owner or the seller, if you will, certainly does need to do a little bit of due diligence and get prepared, because it just makes it easier, to your point. But there's one document that comes up from time to time that isn't your typical document that's required or discussed when you're talking about purchasing not inside of an association, and that's the Estoppel. What is an Estoppel regarding association living, and what's it used for?
So the Estoppel letter, okay, so I would equate it, because as a seller, they'll say, well, why am I being charged that fee? It is basically like you would do for a mortgage. When you are closing on that, when you are buying or selling your property and you're going to pay off that mortgage, they have to ask for a mortgage payoff letter. They need to know that the dollars and cents, what is owed, and that once that is paid, it's free and clear. It's a way to secure the transaction and make sure that it's documented and taken care of with the proper party. So with the Estoppel letter, it is regarding the HOA relationship with the current owner. So the Estoppel letter is basically a snapshot, usually good for 30 days. It might go up a little bit longer than that, but it's saying, okay, if you close on this date, which you are telling us, for this time frame, this owner of this unit or this home is in compliance or is good. And what we're looking for, the title company is looking for, I should say, there's no liens. There's no outstanding violations. There's nothing that would affect the closing. So it's imperative to have it. And sometimes if there's two associations, you might have a master, and then you have the actual local one, depending on what type of community it is. You need two Estoppel letters. Well, if things are backed up, we need a time frame for that. Title companies, may have been used to ordering it X amount of days before closing. Well, we need to up that, just like we would a survey. We need to, again, elongate the time frame so we're not getting these delays that are really causing glitches. But to answer the question in whole, the Estoppel letter is a piece of paper that documents that the association has no lien or no issue or no violation with the current homeowner, and that the homeowner can sell this property. There's a time frame on it, right? Because things can change. For example, if the homeowner didn't pay the association fee, if the closing got delayed, it's a snapshot of clear title almost for HOA, for the HOA to the relationship of the homeowner.
Perfect. Okay. Completely makes sense. Just like a mortgage payoff letter, it's almost like your HOA payoff letter, just to establish that the relationship financially with the seller and the HOA is solid and that there's no unforeseen issues, certainly liens and existing violations. So thank you for that. Now I want to tilt a little bit into a buyer or a seller buying into or selling in an association living. Obviously, the HOA and the condominium space is a significant portion of the market nationally, but certainly here in Florida. Is there anything in your mind that buyers going into an association, certainly if they've never lived in an association before, is there anything in your mind that kind of jumps out that says, hey, I would like the buyer to understand how an association works, or what you're paying for lack of a better phrase, with association maintenance fees, which are typically quarterly or monthly. Is there anything that jumps to mind that you would tell or be kind of responsible to tell the buyer? So Jen, is there anything talking about buyers buying into an association if they've certainly never done it before? Association living can be a little bit confusing and in some cases restrictive. So is there anything that you want to ensure that a buyer knows and understands about association living to maybe alleviate some confusion or frustration?
So we get this all the time, and I personally live in a community that's deed restricted and has a homeowners association attached to it. So I always ask, and I suggest any agent always ask, have they ever lived in a community that had a homeowners association attached to it, or deed restrictions and rules and regulations? So if they have, it's great, and we can say, okay, we pivot off of that and say, okay, well, this also has that, so I would say that sometimes in the realtor remarks, or maybe the community offhand, intimately you've dealt with them, you can give them some highlights, some bullet points, some big ones. Like, for example, are there fencing restrictions? Is there, a 2-year minimum before you can rent it out? Is there an age restriction? Is there a commercial vehicle restriction? So it's nice to have some big bullet points that you might be aware of, or the agent has disclosed. Okay, so we just start off with that basic, but we never want to portray that as if we know that to be true. We just bring it to light and say, let's, follow up with that by getting our documentation. But I think what that does is setting the expectation that you can't just do whatever you want whenever you want, right? I mean, it doesn't need to rain on their parade, and we don't want to pretend that we actually know all the covenants, the restrictions, but that this mindset is set, right? That there will be restrictions, and do they fit in your lifestyle? Because if you have a dog and they need to run around in the neighborhood or in your backyard, and there's a fencing restriction, this is not good. If you thought you were going to live here for a year because you're having a home built, but you want to keep the property and rent it out, and there's a 2-year restriction on that, it's not going to work. So just having a basic understanding is great. It's a great way to form a relationship with your client. You're watching out for them. But the real deal is you have to get a copy of the most accurate covenants or the restrictions. And that is normally provided by the seller unless there's some other circumstance, like a bank foreclosure, or the homeowner is, there's an estate to it, right? Maybe they're in a nursing home or whatever. But the main thing is we have to get a copy of what is the restrictions today. And we can do that. We make phone calls. The title company sometimes can help out. The association can help out. We pull together to get these documents for the buyer to review. When someone asks me, well, what's the difference? I normally say, well, it's kind of one of those things. If you're doing the right things, it's wonderful for you. It keeps the value of the property up by making sure that, you're not putting all this hard work into making sure your lawn is green, keeping your house painted, and your neighbor next to you decides he doesn't want to paint his house. He wants to put 5 trucks in his driveway on blocks. Well, that's not going to be acceptable to most homeowners association communities, because they want the presence of the community to look beautiful. And so it's good when you are doing the rules, you're paying attention to the rules, and if you're trying to break the rules, it's not good, because you're going to get a violation, or you're going to get a letter, you're going to be called out on it, you're going to have to fix it. I equate it to you speeding because you want a police officer there to help you, but when you're speeding, you're cussing the officer because he gave you a speeding ticket. It's the same thing in a homeowners association community. You love it when they tell your neighbor to cut his tree because it looks raggedy, but maybe you don't want them telling you can't keep your commercial vehicle out in the driveway. It has to be parked. So it's an expectation you can set up, and you can let them know that there's rules and regulations. You might have some inside information offhand because you dealt with the community. Throw it out there, but always disclose, we're going to get confirmation because we want to get the latest information directly from the homeowners association community. Get that for them, let them review it, let them ask questions, but set it up with, it's really in your benefit, but it can be somewhat restrictive if you've not lived that way. It can be restrictive for someone to tell you how tall a plant can be in front of your yard if you've not dealt with that before. If you know about it, from my experience, when an agent didn't disclose or downplayed the restrictions, I've seen that before where, parking on the street maybe, oh, well, the neighbors do that. Well, that's not right. I mean, it doesn't matter what a neighbor gets away with on any given day. You have to drive home the severeness of this is not right, because I've seen that. I've seen downplaying go on, and you definitely don't want to do that. Actually, just make it really serious. Make it what it is, and if they want that lifestyle and they can comply with that lifestyle, there's no problem. You downplay it and they thought they had a little bit more breathing room, it can cause a whole bunch of problems and make people really unhappy. Hopefully that helps.
Sure. Now, it does actually. And what we as managing agents with Associa Gulf Coast, we explain to our boards, your rules are your rules and they need to be enforced. And if the Mr. Smith or Mrs. Jones of your association don't follow the rules, that's going to be a problem or has the potential to be a problem. So the enforcement of rules has to be consistent, it has to be fair, and it has to be to everybody. And to what you're saying about with a buyer coming into an association, if the neighbor is getting away with something because the board is refusing to enforce rules, and it's not always the managing agent that's responsible for the enforcement of rules. If the board says not to enforce, the managing agent is kind of stuck in the middle there in that example. But if the neighbor is getting away with something, then it's fair for the buyer to think, well, if they're doing it, I can do it. And quite frankly, that's just really not the case. Everybody does need to follow the rules. That's what, when you sign your documents, when you're buying your property in an association, there's an acknowledgement in those documents, that phone book worth of documents that we've all signed, that will acknowledge what the rules, the regulations, the guidelines are for living in that community. And unit owner buyers, if you will, are expected to follow those guidelines and those rules. So Jen, I really appreciate your time today. You've given a lot of information, a lot of stuff to think about regarding not only the marketplace here in the St. Petersburg, Florida area here in July during the pandemic of 2020, but also a lot of good information about how to make it easier for the seller, talking about the documents, getting them ready. Really do appreciate that, and certainly the explanation of the Estoppel, not only what it is, but what it does, because that can be a confusing part for sellers and certainly for buyers, because quite frankly, people just don't know what it is, and that's okay. That's our job and your job as well to better explain it. So in the future, for those of us who might not be watching the actual screen, what's the best, most convenient way for a buyer, a seller, maybe a board member who has a question, or even a property manager who has a question about the real estate market? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
The easiest way or fastest way, I would say, is my cell phone. They can call me directly on my cell at 727-480-5031. I love getting detailed voice messages because if I'm not able to answer that exact minute, if I have the details, I might be able to have an answer by the time I call back. I also like getting that voice message, but maybe like a very quick text, giving me a quick synopsis on what's going on. It just kind of helps me get some answers maybe ahead of time or faster while I'm in the middle of something. And always on my email. Obviously, that comes right to my phone as well, and my email is real easy. It's home, singular, HOME, at my name, which is Jenn Davida, at Jenn, JENN, Davida, DAVIDA.com.
Outstanding. Jen, really do appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for the opportunity, not only to chat with you, but to give our listeners obviously more information, because we truly believe that more information is better, not worse, for unit owners, for board members, and certainly for property managers. Best of luck to you in the future, and if there's anything we can do, please, let's get together and conquer the world.
Paul, thank you so much for having me speak today. I always love to educate buyers and sellers with the Homeowners Association rules and regulations and all the ins and outs, because it is important and we should really respect what you guys do. You work really hard to keep our communities beautiful, keep us safe and in line. So I thank you as well, and hopefully somebody will reach out and I can help them.
Outstanding. Best of luck to you, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.